Hey, good morning, Stevens Creek Church. Welcome to the Grovetown campus, South Campus, here at the Augusta campus, and those watching online from wherever you are, man, it is good to see you guys. How many of you either attended or volunteered at our youth camp last week? All right, you're so tired still that the hands went up. So the stories from youth camp are amazing. Two of our kids were there. They had a great time. Thank you so much to the volunteers who went, to all the kids who went. The stories of life change, it's just incredible. I love being part of a church that's doing so much to invest into the next generation. I'm so thankful that my kids are growing up here and have grown up here. And just thanks you guys so much for all you do. We are in week 2 of a series called Heroes. And together we're exploring what the Bible says about being a hero of the faith, which is something that all of us can do. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes. And I'm so thankful that God exclusively uses regular people, imperfect people like you and like me, to carry out his work, and that all of us have the opportunity to be a hero of the faith. Before we jump in today, let me tell you a story that I heard recently through our local newspaper, the Augusta Chronicle. One of the most infamous stories the Augusta Chronicle has ever published from the archives is the story of a woman named Essie Dunbar. Now, Essie in 1962 got a cover story at the Augusta Chronicle when she passed away, and they ran the story of her death and her funeral. And that story ended up becoming national news. And the reason why Essie's death and funeral became national news, it isn't because Essie was famous. It wasn't because she was rich or politically connected, but there was something very unique about Essie's life. You see, this had been Essie's second funeral. Her first funeral had been almost 40 years earlier, in 1915, when as a young woman, Essie suffered from epilepsy, and after one particularly violent epileptic seizure, the doctor pronounced her dead. Family, sad, took her to the funeral home. This was before the time when autopsies and embalming were common practice, so all they did to prepare her for the funeral was just wash her, change her clothes, do her hair, and place her in a coffin. A couple days later, family gathered around. They grieved. They had the ceremony. They went to the graveside, had the little graveside service, and had lowered the coffin into the ground when Essie's sister, the newspaper reports, who'd come all the way from the state of Maine and gotten to there as fast as she could, ran up and said, "Oh, no, it's over. I missed it." And she was so distraught. She said, "Please, I need to say goodbye to my sister. I need to see her one more time and have that moment of closure." And so the family, they said, "Well, that sounds reasonable, I guess." And they agreed that they would hoist up the coffin and open up the lid and let this sister have a final moment with Essie. But to the shock of everyone, when they opened up the lid, according to the Augusta Chronicle, Essie sat up and smiled at her sister, as if just waking up from a nap, to which Essie's sister and everyone there ran screaming in the other direction. The paper reported that the preacher who'd done the funeral fell into the open grave and cracked 3 of his ribs. It was chaos, and poor Essie had no idea what was going on. She had no memory of the last couple days. She just woken up from a long nap. And so once the chaos calmed down and people realized that she was never fully dead in the first place, everybody was thrilled to welcome Essie home and to celebrate her. And by all accounts, over the next 4 decades, she lived a pretty normal, modest life, and then she died again in 1962, at which time, paper reports, the doctors were extra careful to run every test imaginable to make sure she was fully dead this time. The paper reported the second funeral had happened without incident. Now, I love the story of Essie Dunbar because it's entertaining and it's fun, but to me, it's more than that. It's a story about perseverance, right? Perseverance. And maybe you can't relate to Essie in terms of having had a funeral thrown for you, but maybe there are certain parts of your life that do feel like they're already dead. Maybe your marriage feels like it's in a coffin right now. Maybe your dreams feel like that they are dead and in the ground. Maybe your health, maybe even your faith. But perseverance is that inner strength that says, you know what? God's not done with that yet. And I'm not done with that yet either. And perseverance and persistence is something that God honors and God rewards and God wants to cultivate in each one of us because it's one of the hallmarks of being a hero of the faith and living the life that God wants us to live. Today we're going to look at a story in the Bible about a woman who had perseverance. who had persistence. She had a persistent faith. And Jesus pointed to her example and said, and that's the way that all of us should be. The Bible refers to her as the persistent widow. And we're going to look at her story in the Gospel of Luke. And if you have a Bible or the Bible app on your phone, you can turn there. If not, don't worry. We'll have all these on the screens behind me. Before we turn there, though, just as a kind of a recap of what this whole series is about, this is the principle we're coming back to every week. A hero of the faith specifically, is anyone who courageously follows God and guides others to do the same. And that's something all of us can do. You don't need to have a PhD. You don't need to be an elite athlete. You don't need to have $1 million in the bank. All of us, through all walks of life, we can do that. We can courageously follow God, and we can guide others to do the same. In fact, that's what we're called to do. And a verse that we're coming back to each week is one of my favorite verses in the Bible because it's so simple, it's so straightforward, and yet it's so powerful in its application of how we as Christians should live in this broken world. Romans 12:21 says, don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. And we're all going to face evil. We're all going to face injustice. And all of us sometimes need to be honest that the evil that we face, there are moments when the evil we face, we see in the reflection when we look in the mirror, because we all have sin within us. We all battle against our selfish, sinful human nature. And then outside of us, we're going to live in a broken world where there's going to be injustice and chaos. And how do we respond to all of that? Well, we respond with persistence and with faith. And that's the story that we're going to look at today. Jesus gives us an example. And before we dive into her story, a little bit of background. So Jesus taught using stories because Jesus, who created us, knew that we responded to stories better than we respond to facts and figures and pie charts and data and PowerPoint presentations. And there's a place for all of that, but stories are really what we are. We're storytellers as human beings. We remember the stories. And so he would tell and teach in forms of stories. And the stories he used were called parables. And parables were stories that had a moral lesson that highlighted these deep spiritual truths. And there's some debate among biblical scholars about which of these parables talked about real specific people and real specific actual places and events, and which ones were more metaphor, just describing the spiritual truth. So with the persistent widow we're going to look at today, we don't know for certain that this was a real woman and a real judge, but we do know for certain that this example of persistence highlights a real truth that Jesus wants us to know, that this is what faith is supposed to look like. One other quick note about this story is that you'll often see throughout the Gospels Jesus making women the heroes of the stories that he told. And we read that as 21st century Americans and we think, well, yeah, sure, of course, that makes sense. But 2,000 years ago, the culture and time and place in which Jesus came, the world was very different. This part of the world, the Middle East, 2,000 years ago specifically, was very different in how women were viewed. There was an enormous amount of sexism and misogyny and distrust to women. Women at the time didn't have many rights. In most cases, they couldn't own property. In most cases, they could not really work outside of the home. They were not trusted. A woman's testimony was not valid in the court of law. There were so many repressive things that were just kind of holding women down, which makes it not only countercultural, but actually radical when you look at how Jesus interacted with women in the Gospels. On every page, he's talking to women, which at the time, you didn't speak to a woman unless she was an immediate relative. He's listening to women. He's teaching women. He's healing women. He's empowering women. He's protecting women. Because at that time, again, this double standards were so off in the way that men and women related to the law. For instance, if two are caught in the act of adultery, which was illegal, the man in the act of adultery would basically get a slap on the wrist. The woman in the same sin, the same act, could be stoned to death. And there's a powerful story in the Gospels of Jesus stepping in to point out that hypocrisy and protect a woman who'd been caught in the act of adultery and show her mercy. He's protecting, and then in the stories he tells, he's elevating women and celebrating them as heroes of the stories. And I say all this to say, listen, as a side note, but an important one, don't ever believe this cultural myth that so many people will try to use in our culture to somehow discredit Christianity and say, oh, Christianity's so repressive towards women, and it's always held women back. Because if you'll do an honest historical study, I'm telling you, there is no person throughout human history who has done more to protect women, celebrate women, and elevate women than Jesus Christ. There's simply not. And so just know that and read the Gospels through that lens, and you'll see it on every page. And so Jesus tells us this story about a woman who's the hero and an example of faith that he lifts up as a hero of the faith. So we're going to find her story in Luke chapter 18. It says, one day Jesus told his disciples a story about how they should always pray and never give up. There was a judge in a certain city, he said, who neither feared God nor cared about people. And a widow of that city came to him repeatedly saying, give me justice in this dispute with my enemy. And so Jesus is setting the stage. He's saying there's a widow. And in that culture, a widow, not only did women not have many rights, but a widow had even fewer rights, because it means she didn't have a man, a husband any longer to be her protector and provider. And in that time, like, a woman's whole social security and social status was tied directly to a man, either a father to protect her or a husband to protect and provide for her, or in her older age as a widow, an older son to provide and protect for her. Apparently, this woman had none of that. So she's having this injustice happening in her life, and there's no recourse. She can't afford an attorney. There's no one to help her. There's no relative to come to her aid. And the only guy who can give her justice is a judge who's unjust, a judge who doesn't care about her, who doesn't care about her situation. And so what does she do in this situation? Well, we're going to see the first principle here. A hero doesn't let godless people or difficult circumstances cause them to lose faith or compromise their integrity. The first thing we're going to learn about this woman is that even though she's having to deal with a judge who is not just, a judge who does not have integrity, she is not going to compromise her own integrity in the process. She's not going to play dirty. She's not going to be overcome by evil like the verse we looked at, but she's going to overcome evil with good by trusting God and doing the right thing. The story goes on. Jesus tells us the judge ignored her for a while, but finally he said to himself, I don't fear God or care about people, but this woman is driving me crazy. I'm going to see that she gets justice because she's wearing me out with her constant requests. I mean, this is a funny story. Jesus had a sense of humor, right? This is a funny image that he's painting, that this woman is just relentless. She is not going to give up. And this judge, he's admitting, like, listen, I don't care about her. Like, I don't care about this situation, but she is wearing me out. And I'm going to do whatever I got to do to make sure she gets justice simply because of her persistence. Now, some people, and I'm going to pause here, this isn't the end of the story. Some people misread this story in a really, really terrible way by thinking that the judge in this story is a reflection of how God is. And what Jesus is going to make really clear is God is nothing like this judge. In fact, God and this judge only have one thing in common, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. This judge doesn't care about people. God cares infinitely about people. This judge doesn't care about justice. God cares infinitely about justice. This judge is annoyed by people coming to him. God longs to hear from his children. The only thing that this judge and God have in common is that both respond to persistence. And the reason why both respond to persistence is because God created us in his image. He created the world to represent natural laws that reflect his character. And all of the world responds to persistence. Even in nature, if you look at a little trickle of water, a stream of water, it has almost no power by itself. But that stream of water flowing in the same spot for thousands of years will cut through a mountain because even nature responds to persistence. But when you go to God, don't go to him as if he's this unjust judge, because God wants to hear from you. God cares about your justice, and he's going to reward you. Jesus teaches on this principle a lot throughout the Gospels. Here's one of the more famous verses where he talks about it. Matthew chapter 7 says, keep on asking and you'll receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open to you. But we live in a world where as soon as something gets a little difficult, we just give up. Or as soon as we pray a prayer and it doesn't get answered right away, we give up. And this last week was Prime Day on Amazon Prime. How many bought something on Prime Day? Of course you did. I did. It's like an excuse to buy something that you don't really need, but it's cheap. And even better, Jeff Bezos gets it to your house in 2 days or less. 2 days or less. That's the extent of our patience. We are an Amazon Prime generation, and we expect God to be an Amazon Prime kind of prayer answerer. Like, God, I'm going to pray. I'm going to give you 2 days. In fact, I kind of expect overnight delivery on this one because I've done my part. I've subscribed. I'm a Prime member. I'm a Christian. I'm going to pray, and you're going to answer it in 24 hours or less. Or else, Lord, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. I'm going to just deal with this on my own. I'm going to get somebody else who can fix it. And we forget that God's timing is almost never our timing. We forget the power of persistent prayer. When you read the Bible, it's a story of God's people being people of persistent prayer, generational prayer. I mean, praying for things that they knew they would never even see in their lifetime, praying for what their children and their grandchildren and future generations would experience. We see them praying thousands of years for the Messiah to come, for God's chosen one. And then Jesus finally does come, and he did everything that he said he would do. And then he said, I'll come back. And we as God's people have been praying for the last 2,000 years that he would come back. And he will. Maybe in our lifetime. Maybe 2,000 years from now. I don't know. But God's timing is always perfect. And we as God's people need to be praying persistent prayers. I'm so thankful that I grew up seeing a mom and a dad who were willing to pray persistently. And I saw this in a number of ways. My mom, when I was a little kid, like almost 40 years ago, she and some other moms came together and they formed a mom's prayer group. And they would get together every week and they'd pray for us. They didn't just pray. They would eat and they would laugh and they would go shopping. And like once a year, they'd go to the beach. I mean, these ladies have fun. They still have fun. 40 years later, they're still the best of friends. But they prayed, and they prayed for us. They prayed for our future spouses. They prayed for our future children. They prayed for our faith. And even though I don't see these ladies often, when I do, and when they tell me, like, I've been praying for you, I know they mean it. When they met Ashley as we were preparing to get married and on our wedding day, and they said, I've been praying for you long before I knew your name. I knew that they meant it. When they held our children for the first time and they said, I've been praying for this child long before you knew they were coming, I knew that they meant it. And I feel like in so many ways, I'm living out the blessing of somebody else's persistent prayers. And whether you realize it or not, every person here at every campus, every person watching online, there are blessings in your life that are the result of somebody else's faith. And we have the responsibility to pass those kind of blessings on to the people in our own lives, to model faith for them, to pray for them persistently, consistently. We need that. And I'm hoping to do that for my future grandchildren and for my children. And I pray for the young women that they're going to marry someday. And I want to pass those kind of blessings on. And you can do the same. Let's pray persistent prayers. My dad was a man of persistent prayer too, and still is. And I think of several examples of what that looked like for him. But one example that really stands out and made an impression on me started as a really sad story. When I was a young boy, we lived sort of out in the country, and there wasn't much around our house. But a couple miles from our house, there was a gas station right off the interstate, nothing else around it. And we would drive there often because there was nothing else around. It's where we got gas. It's where we got snacks. Dad would pass it every day on the way to work, every day on the way home from work. He worked at a car plant. Every day he'd pass it. He stopped there often. And usually who was working at this gas station was this young single mom named Kendra, picking up every shift she could get to help provide for her young son. Well, tragically, one night when Kendra was working a night shift, somebody drove in off the interstate. They robbed the gas station. They shot and killed Kendra. And they drove away. No witnesses. Long before the days of any DNA, there was an old security camera in the gas station that hadn't worked in years. No leads, no witnesses. And I remember every time we would drive by that gas station, my dad would pray, just whisper a prayer, Father, bring justice. Bring justice for Kendra. Bring justice for her son. God, you're a God of justice. Bring to light who did this. Every time we drove by it, he'd look over that way and he would pray a prayer. And he did that for days. And then he did that for weeks. A year went by. He's still doing that. 2 years went by. He's still doing it. And even as a kid, I'm almost just kind of annoyed by this. I'm like, Dad, let it go, right? I mean, God, if he was going to do something, he would have done it, right? I mean, you don't have to keep praying the same prayer. But I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. Every time he'd drive by, God, bring justice. After a couple years, they tore down the gas station. He'd drive by the empty lot, pray the same prayer. A couple years later, they built a new gas station on top of the empty lot. He'd drive by the new gas station, and he'd pray the same prayer. Year after year after year. About 15 years went by of Dad praying that same prayer every time he drove by the gas station. When all of a sudden, out of the blue, the Kentucky State Police get a phone call from a bartender in Michigan. And this bartender said, listen, I don't know why I'm calling. I hear crazy stuff all the time at my bar. It's usually nothing. But I just, for some reason, felt really compelled that I needed to call and tell you guys this. But there's this regular at the bar. He's a loudmouth. He's always talking, telling stories. And last night he really got going, talking about all this stuff he'd done and gotten away with. And so I started kind of egging him on, like, oh yeah, what's the worst thing you ever did? He said, I killed somebody. I said, man, you didn't kill anybody. He said, yeah, I did. I said, okay, who'd you kill? And he tells me this story, and it creeps me out because it had such specific detail. He said, I was driving down I-75 in Kentucky, and I was high, but the high was wearing off, and I wanted to score some drugs, and I didn't have any money, and I was kind of getting desperate. So I took this exit, and there's this little gas station off this exit. And I go in, nobody around. I pull out my gun. I ask the girl for the money in the register, and she gives it to me. I kind of panicked for some reason. I wasn't thinking straight, and I shot her. And I drove off. He said, man, you're making that up. He said, I'm not making it up. He said, I even remember her name. It was right there on her name tag. Kendra. So this man calls the police, said, I don't know if you've got a case that sounds anything like that, but I just felt like I needed to let you know. And this guy comes in here a lot. If you want to send somebody, I'll point him out. So the police did that. They sent somebody, walked up to the bartender. They said, that's the guy right there. They went over to him and said, we're here to talk to you about Kendra. He broke down, told the whole story, confessed to everything. Spent the rest of his life in jail. After that, Dad would drive by the gas station every day. Say, thank you, Lord. You're a God of justice. Now, you might hear a story like that and say, that's just a coincidence. But I say, it takes a whole lot more faith to believe a coincidence like that than it does to believe in a God who is living, breathing, and wants to set all things right in his perfect timing. He answers and he listens to our persistent prayers, and he's never, ever forgets the injustices. He's ready to make all things right in his perfect timing. And we can trust him. And on this side of heaven, we don't always see it play out. But it makes God no less just. Because in the scope of eternity, he is writing a story where it always is going to work out like it should. And part of our faith is trusting in that. Even when we're in those seasons of having to endure, having to wait on his answers, having to wait on his reply, to know that he's always there. And that's the next principle we can learn. A hero perseveres even when it would be easier to quit. This persistent widow, it would have been easier for her to just say, forget this. I'm just going to leave this guy alone. I'm just going to never get justice, I guess. But that's not what she did. Jesus went on and wrapped the story up this way. He said, then the Lord said this, learn a lesson from this unjust judge, even though he rendered a just decision in the end. Don't you think God will surely give justice to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will grant them justice quickly. But when the Son of Man returns, how many will he find on the earth who have faith? Jesus is telling us, listen, again, don't mistake the unjust judge for God. They're as different as they could be. God cares, he listens, he wants to bring you justice. But he's looking for developing faith in his people. And that takes time. Faith is what develops when we're waiting on God, when we don't see the answers yet, when we're trusting that God's plan is good even when we can't see it and even when it doesn't make sense. A hero does this. This is what faith looks like. A hero trusts that God's timing is always perfect. And that's hard to do because we like our timing better than God's timing. We like Amazon Prime. And God, he just doesn't work that way. But this is what God does say, and this is good news. At the right time, I, the Lord, will make it happen. Isn't that good news? I don't know what you're praying for. I don't know what you're waiting for. I don't know what that prayer is where you're just tired of praying it. God, when are you going to come through on this? When are you going to get me out of this situation? When are you going to fix this? When are you going to restore this? God's saying, don't give up. I'm with you. I'm for you. I'm working all things together for your good. I'm doing something even while you're waiting, even in those moments when it feels like I'm not getting anywhere. God's doing something. Sometimes faith is like running on a treadmill. When you're running on a treadmill, you're literally going nowhere. But it's making you stronger. It's making you faster. It's making you healthier. And sometimes faith looks like that. Sometimes you're running and you're covering a lot of ground, but sometimes it's the treadmill. You're like, God, I'm just waiting. I'm sweating. This is hard. This is uncomfortable. And I'm not going anywhere. God's like, yeah, but what you don't see is you're getting a lot stronger. I'm not wasting this effort. I'm doing something in you. Keep trusting me. I love this verse from the Psalms. I'm confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I'm here in the land of the living. So wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. And that's maybe the hardest part of faith, is just being patient. Because none of us are patient. I'm not patient. I struggle with patience all the time. I get in line at Publix at the 10 items or fewer lane, and a lady in front of me's got 14 items, and I stop being a Christian right there. I'm like, Lord, let her car break down. Let her get a speeding ticket. They're just like, isn't it funny though how we're so quick to point out anything somebody else does wrong, and we don't see it in ourselves. Like, guys, all of us need grace. All of us mess up. All of us are pretty selfish. All of us are pretty impatient. And God is so patient with us. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful that we have a God who is, he's always there. He always cares. He's always working on our behalf. And I know that every person here, one thing we all have in common, one thing every person at every campus, at Grovetown, at South, watching online, one thing we all have in common is we're all waiting on something. There's something in our lives, some situation, we're like, God, when are you gonna fix this? And then even if that thing gets fixed, then quickly we move on to something else. Okay, God, that's great, thanks, but when are you gonna fix this? And the whole time, God's like, I want you to lean on me in the waiting. I want you to see that I'm here for you. I want you to grow in your relationship with me and trust that I'm gonna take care of this. There have been so many seasons in my life, in my family's life, where I couldn't at the moment see what God was doing. I couldn't understand why he was taking so long to do it. But then looking back, every time looking back, it makes so much more sense. One of those stories was the story of how our family first got to Augusta more than 17 years ago. Ashley and I we were in Kentucky where we'd grown up. For Ashley's family, everybody in her family for generations back, everybody had lived in the same place. Every cousin, every aunt, every uncle, every grandparent, everybody lived within a 30-minute radius of each other. And it's like, it didn't occur to any of them that you could go anywhere else. And so we just thought, well, I guess that'll be our story. We'll probably end up here too, which is fine. And so I had a ministry job at a church there in Kentucky, and church was on the outside. Things looked good. It was growing. Looked good on the outside, but on the inside, it just wasn't as healthy as it looked on the outside. Our lead pastor there turned out to not be a man of integrity the way that our pastor here is, the way that Pastor Marty is. This pastor there was living with a lot of sin, kind of living a double life, and that came to light, as it always does, because Jesus says what's done in secret will be shouted from the rooftops, and it was. And when that happened, he left the church in a really messy way, and it revealed a lot of unhealthy dynamics that had been there at the church all along. And it was just an unhealthy environment. And here I'm a young, inexperienced pastor. I got one baby, one on the way. And I'm praying every day, God, get me out of here. Like, I'll do anything else. Like, I don't think I want to be a pastor. If this is what it is, I'll do anything else. I will teach school, I'll mow yards, I'll sell cars, I'll mop floors, anything but this. But it's like God was not opening any door. It was like he was saying, just wait. I'm like, oh, that's the worst. Wait. And months went by. And when you're in a really tough situation, months feel like years. And I just thought, God, give me the strength for today, because I can't keep doing this. And we're praying, we're preparing for our second baby to come. I mean, it was a stressful time. And in the midst of that, I was scheduled to lead a trip of college students and young adults to drive down to Atlanta and go to the Passion Conference, which is, they still do. It's bigger and better than ever now. And so Ashley and I went, and we had, my mom watched our baby, and we went and led these young adults, and we're in the hotel room and just talking, and I'm like, maybe we're trying to limit God, because we're only looking for opportunities right there where we live. Have you ever limited God like that? God, I'll do whatever you want as long as it's in this zip code. I'll do whatever you want as long as it fits this exact criteria, instead of just saying, God, I'll do whatever you want. So I said, let's just see what else is out there. Maybe we'll move. So I got online, and just that day, that very day, this job had been posted, looking for a pastor in Augusta, Georgia. I didn't know anything about Augusta, Georgia. I think there was a golf tournament here. I didn't know a soul here. I didn't know anything about it. So I got online, and I went to this church's website, and I pulled up a sermon, and I started listening. And Ashley's laying in bed, kind of half asleep, 5 months pregnant, trying to take a nap. And she hears this sermon coming through the computer, and she said, who is that preaching? That's the thickest Southern accent I've ever heard in my life. I said, it says here his name's Marty Baker. I started listening to the sermon. I'm like, this guy's all right, Let's do this. I said, let's have an adventure. Tomorrow night, they do a midweek service. Let's drive to Augusta. We're never going to be this close. And we'll just sneak in. Go to the service. If it's weird, they start passing snakes around or something, we'll leave. But if it's not weird, who knows? So she's always been down for the adventure, and so we got in the car, told our group, like, hey, we're going to take the day off. You guys have fun. We'll catch up later. Drove to Augusta. Now, this church right now, all the campuses are beautiful, but I want you to go back in time with me 17 years. There were not all these campuses. We had one campus, the Augusta campus, and it did not look like it looks now. You drive in now, it looks like the Augusta National. It's like beautiful, hear birds chirping, Disney princesses singing. Like, it's really nice. 17 years ago, I drove by this place and totally missed it, first off. Then I finally made it in here, and we were here early, and I drove up, and it did not have this great curb appeal that it has now. It was ugly. I'm just going to say it. It was ugly. And the building, I had to make sure we were at the right place, because it looked to me like an abandoned post office. Like, is this a church even? And I'm embarrassed to say this now. Like, had I not driven 2 hours to get there, I wouldn't have gone inside. I'm like, I'm sorry, sweetie, this was a dud. But then we kind of got to thinking, right now we're part of a church that looks great on the outside, but on the inside, it's not healthy. What if this is the opposite? What if this is unimpressive on the outside, but didn't God say, God doesn't look at things the way people look at it. People looks at the outside, God looks at the heart. God looks at what's on the inside. Maybe that's what's going on here. So we decided to go in, and going in was one of the best decisions I ever made. Sat in this very room, which was a lot smaller at the time. Pastor Marty delivered an authentic, honest, biblical message. Worship was real. The people were warm and real. It wasn't perfect. There's no perfect church. If you're looking for a perfect church, you're going to be disappointed everywhere you go until you get to heaven. But I could tell it was healthy. This is healthy. These people really love God. They really believe his word. They want to live with real faith. And so I went up to Pastor Marty afterwards, and I was like, hey, my name's Dave. I'm from Kentucky. And I told him a little bit of our story, and he was real intrigued, showed me around, and we got talking. I had some phone calls with different people. A couple of days later, he offered me a job. I never even sent a resume. To this day, they don't have a resume for me. They have no idea that I'm unqualified to be here. And if you know Pastor Marty, you know that him meeting me and like offering me a job is miraculous, because I've seen the man pray for 6 months about which color sweater he should buy. Like he spends some time on decisions. But in this particular decision, he was like, I think God's in this. And I'm like, I do too. So we loaded up our car, drove down here. Some guys from the church helped us unload a U-Haul. Didn't know a soul. And it's been the greatest gift. Not that it was easy. Moving's hard. Trying to, plant roots in a new community's hard. All that. But God was in it. He was in it. And I am so thankful that he was in it. I'm so thankful for his timing that was saying wait, and that I didn't jump into something that just wasn't his best for us. Because some place that wasn't even on our radar turned out to be one of the greatest gifts that he's ever given to us. And I tell you that story not because there's anything interesting about my life. I tell you that story just to remind you that God cares so much about every detail of all of our lives. He cares about every detail of your life. He cares about what you're praying for. My prayers don't get to God any faster than yours do. He wants to hear from you. He wants to show you his faithfulness in this season while you're waiting, in this season while you're dealing with injustice, while you're wrestling with difficult situations. He wants to say, lean into me. I'm here for you in this. I want to hear from you. I want to comfort you. I want to show you that I'm faithful and that I'm working all this together for your good. And I'm so thankful for a God who's always with us, for a God who cares, for a God who will bring us justice in whatever we're facing. Because he loves you. He really, really loves you. And that is the good news of his word. That is the good news that keeps all of us going even on the hard days. So let's stand together. I just want to pray a prayer of blessing over you at every campus. I want to pray specifically too for those who maybe haven't yet made that decision to follow Jesus. And if you want specific prayer after the services, we'll have our prayer team available down front at each of our campuses after every service. If you ever want prayer, we'd be honored to pray with you. But right now, let's just pray together. Will you join me in prayer? Father, we thank you for loving us. Thank you, God, for giving us real examples in the Bible, showing us that regular people, just like us, God, imperfect people, impatient people, we can be heroes of faith just by trusting in you and your goodness and being persistent in that. And so give us persistence today. Give us the strength to keep going, to keep trusting, to keep praying, knowing you're with us, knowing you're for us, not growing bitter, not losing heart, not compromising our integrity, but God, trusting in you. And we thank you that you are a God of justice. We thank you that you're with us every step of the way. God, for anybody here that doesn't yet know you in a personal way, let today be the day that they reach out and say, Jesus, today I choose to follow you. Forgive me of the way that I've lived. Adopt me into your family. God, make me into the person I was meant to be. You're my Lord and my Savior. And for all of us, God, we recommit to that today. We recommit to perseverance today. And Lord, we trust you. And we know that you're with us. You'll never leave us or forsake us. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's give God a hand for his goodness. Friends, thanks so much for being here today. Have a great week. We'll see you next week as we wrap up this series. God bless.